I'm Greg, and you're listening to Totally Preventable.
Totally preventable.
Totally preventable.
Totally preventable. Totally preventable.
Totally preventable.
Totally preventable.
Hey, Greg.
Yay, Polly.
What's going on?
Well, now that I'm in the building, it's a good day so far. Had a late start today.
Sometimes it's tough getting into the building.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Kind of goes with the day too. It's
Mm.
kind of rainy and thundery out, so
Yeah. I get the weather blues.
yeah. Yawns. I've been yawning all morning.
And they're catchy.
They are. So who's on the podcast today?
So today we have some familiar faces, but not with the same name. So we have some performers from Second Act, formerly Improbable Players
Mm-hmm.
and Coast. So I know we know Anna Best from Coast,
Yeah.
but now it's a merged organization, and now they're Second Act. So
Awesome.
they've done some great plays.
Yeah, I've seen a couple.
Yeah, I remember Four Legs to Stand On.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is going to be good to learn about what the Second Act is all about and see what they're up to.
Maybe you can change your career.
I might have to.
Yeah.
I might have to. I am a stellar actor.
Is this going to be like a audition and like a secret audition? You're gonna be...
I don't really want to say it's an audition to the audience, because then they'll be expecting it.
Yeah.
They'll be so like, wow, he's so good. We don't even know that he's acting.
Okay.
So I don't want to like toot my own horn, but beep, beep. I might.
Yeah, you can be like
Exactly.
tears coming down at some point.
May see some over dramatization in my reactions just to
Okay.
prove that I too can be an actor.
Okay, all right. I look forward to
Right. So without further ado, today joining us on Totally Preventable Podcast, we have Ryan Beard, actor, person in recovery, teaching artist, and program manager of Second Act. And joining us as well is Brashani Reece, recovery storyteller and performer of Second Act and person in long-term recovery. Hello to both of you.
Hello. Thank you, Greg and Polly, for having us on the Totally Preventable podcast.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're very excited to be here.
Our pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. So I got connected with both of you through Anna Bess Moyer. And so could you tell us a little bit about Second Act, and maybe, because I know Anna Bess through Coast, the connection between the two?
Yes, absolutely. And so Second Act is a merged program, and it was created in 2001. So we're really quite a young organization, but the history goes back to 1984, from a woman named Lynn Bratley found an organization called Improbable Players in Massachusetts out of Watertown. And she created a play based on her own life. She was a person in recovery, about a family that is affected by alcohol and drug use. And that play still exists today. We still do it. So Improbable Players existed for many years and did shows with actors who are in long-term recovery themselves. And they would go to schools, community centers, other youth serving organizations, and do this show, and then do a question and answer with the students, as well as share their own personal stories. And, Lynn ran that program in that organization for many years until she retired, and we had another executive director take over. And during that time in 2016, I want to say, Anna Bess Moyer Bell, who is a drama therapist, created a similar organization called Coast, out of Rhode Island, and that stood for creating outreach about addiction support together. And they also did plays around substance use disorder, specifically, focusing on the opioid epidemic was on the rise as well, and still is, of course. And then, and the pandemic happened, and seemed like the right time as things were slowing down to combine the two organizations. And we renamed ourselves Second Act, although I think Totally Preventable was a candidate in the running for a new business name there, but Second Act is what we stuck with. And yeah, here we are today, going strong and growing.
Nice.
Wow. All right. Well, we're gonna have to make sure Annabeth doesn't take our name.
Yeah, hands off. Annabeth.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves?
Sure, I can go first. Ryan, thank you for the wonderful explanation of the history of our two amazing organizations coming together, which is really exciting for us. So my name is Brashani. I am a person in long-term recovery. I have been in recovery for about 8 years. And I sort of the story that I focus on in my recovery and when I'm talking to young people, especially, is that the idea that I was the A student, top of my class, graduating, as expected, going to college. To some degree, I had a life that you wouldn't have necessarily known that there was a lot happening underneath the surface. But I was struggling intensely with mental health issues. And that was sort of something I just really, I guess, kept inside for the most part. And then my addiction really became full-fledged and overwhelming when I hit graduate school. So I was no longer able to get the A's and be the shining star because I was amongst many shining stars. And I was no longer the smartest person in the room. And I started to cope with the feelings of imposter syndrome, inferiority complexes, depressive episodes, and things like that, a lot more with substances and other acting out behaviors that were just really meant to get me out of myself. I really just didn't want to be myself. That all came to a head and came crashing down technically about a little over 4 years ago. We're approaching the anniversary of actually my bottom, which we sometimes in recovery speak, we talk about that as like the lowest point in our journey. And I lost everything. I lost my relationship. I lost my place to live. It all just came crashing down around me really quickly. I actually auditioned for Improbable Players within 3 months of that incident happening, because I started to just doubt. I had been in recovery, but I wasn't sober. In meetings, but I wasn't sober. I was still acting out in other ways, even if I wasn't using substances. And I players. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story.
And for myself, it's funny, we were saying these are, I suppose, elongated versions of what we used to call drunkalogs, which were not a word we use anymore. It's a stigmatizing word, but basically our personal stories that our actors share. And so it's been a while since I've told mine, actually, but I had a pretty normal standard childhood. Grew up an Army brat, moved around a lot. So I was in the West Coast, got to college, and started really feeling the effects of mental health, depression for the first time, and obviously was looking for coping skills, and knew very little about mental health or substance use disorder. But when I would go out to parties in college, I'd binge drink until I got blackout drunk, because why else are you drinking? I thought, isn't that the point? And of course, this problem grew and grew until I was, as it grew, was getting eventually, after a couple of years, blackout drunk almost every single night of the week. And also using marijuana, some other drugs as well. And my life was just becoming a complete disaster. I was barely limping through college. I was not the A student. C's get degrees, as they said. Definitely had other interests. Obviously substances were not helping in any of that. So I did reach a point where, one day I think I was through the end of a 10-day bender, and it just had a moment that, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I thought, if I just keep on going like this, I'm not going to live a whole lot longer. Finally got some help, had a couple difficult conversations to get myself some help, and got into a treatment center. And, that helped for a while, but, I also had a setback. I relapsed, as they say. That's part of the recovery process, as we learn later. But, eventually was able to get myself, in a position where I was able to abstain from drugs and alcohol for a very long time. And, it's been going on about 10 years in recovery now, almost. And I joined Improbable Players in 2018. I moved out to Boston from the West Coast, and linked up with Improbable Players almost right away, and was doing plays with them. And then I have a background in teaching and improvisation, and started teaching some of their workshops in Boston as well. And that position kind of grew and grew. And it's just a fantastic organization for me and my recovery, and the people involved are all just so wonderful. I mean, it's a small community in many ways. It's actors who are also in recovery and are also like available in the middle of the day to do a show sometimes. Yeah, that's my story in a nutshell, a big nutshell.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you sharing, and congratulations to both of you on your recovery.
Thank you.
So we work with kids a lot. We work with other populations too. And so I read that you do some work with health classes or meeting the standards of the health requirements. So do you work with schools? Do schools let you come in and do programs?
Yes. I mean, Ryan as the teaching artist in residence, has more detail about this, but the focus of our theater is it is educational theater, but it's meant to be, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of our big focuses is really the destigmatization of addiction. A lot of this is just, how do we have a real conversation about, there are many pathways to addiction, and then there are many pathways to recovery. And one of the trickiest parts about all of this is that there's going to be a lot of resources if you can tap into them, but your pathway to recovery is going to end up being unique. It's a snowflake situation. So I remember when I first got connected with my sponsor, I was allowed to set my own bottom lines. Now, bottom lines this is 12, not something that's endorsed by Second Act, as the only pathway to recovery. Is one of many tools. But in that space, I remember my sponsor saying to me, the best part about this program is you get to set your own bottom lines and your own top lines, which are these are the things I'm no longer going to do. If I'm doing these behaviors, it means I'm active in my addiction. And then here are my top lines, where these are the things that I do if I know that I'm healthy and that I'm really working towards, maintaining my recovery. And he said, it's also the worst part about this program, because if you're setting your own bottom lines and you're not open to any sort of feedback or working with a community, then you can really, as an addict, I have a mind that works, is very creative. And I can work to set many bottom lines that actually just allow me to be, in my recovery, meeting my bottom lines while still acting out in my addiction. So it's a long-winded way of giving an example of when we're in schools and we're doing these plays and we're bringing real life complicated scenarios. Our stories don't summarize our narratives. Like Ryan and I just had to do a really simple summary of our journey. There's many, many, many complexities to it, as you know. When we go into schools and we tell these stories, we actually introduce some of these complexities and talk about that it's not just this straight line. And when we would talk about addiction in the past, we acted like it was. Don't do drugs, just say no, all of these things that have no efficacy, no empirical, support behind them. And then in that space, we're basically making it okay for adolescents, though we do have some like preteens who like get exposure to our programs too. But we're talking to them about that this is a part of being a human being, and that no matter what you're struggling with, there are people who have struggled with it before, and you don't have to be alone with it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We've been talking a lot about how, because we're prevention, and we are grant funded through the state and federal governments, we have to do a certain path, and how our path is kind of expanding to more harm reduction, which is awesome, but that should include other ways of preventing. You know, we know a lot of kids in high school are going to drink, so are we going to disregard them? No, we know we need to give them tools to get better, be safe, and those kind of things. So I'm glad you're inclusive of everybody in the storytelling.
When having lived experience, when you're going into these different seminars, these different audiences, do you still get jitters?
Ryan, I just talked a lot. You go.
You know, because
I would say no, not really. Certainly if you haven't done the play before and it's the first few times you're doing it, you're going to be a little nervous. And if you're not used to sharing your story, I mean, so many, maybe outside of perhaps a 12-step meeting, you know, people don't typically get up and, you know, talk about, you know, their struggles with substance use disorder, mental health. But now, you know, very quickly, you know, our actors are exposed to talking about their honest, you know, struggles with, you know, these issues in front of audiences of, I think our average audience size is about 200 people when we're in, you know, middle schools and high schools. So I think personally for me, and kind of what my assumption is with other actors of ours, is that those jitters go away pretty quickly. And especially we like to start our plays off with a few laughs, you know, get people rolling, got some jokes in there. So, you know, we have fun with it.
Allow me to put in a plug for the opposite perspective really quick. So the only time I get jitters is with a certain age group, which I think is reflective of my own adolescent experience and how I experienced a lot of social isolation, a lot of socialization, a lot of ostracization, a lot of feeling like I never really fit in. And so there is that sort of mid adolescent stage of like 15 to 17 where I call it the too cool for school audience. And in that space, there is still this little part of me that I'm now so aware of, this 15-year-old version of Brashani, who just really wants them to like me and think that I'm cool too. And so it's not a performance jitter like that I'm afraid of doing the show or that I'm nervous that I'm going to mess up the show. But I just, in recovery work, there's a lot of mental health work to be done. And becoming aware of that 5-year-old Brashani and that 15-year-old Brashani that led 25-year-old Brashani to binge drink, right? And those unhealed wounds, when I'm in those spaces, I can become aware of her again very clearly.
Wow.
High school kids can be tough.
It can be tough. There's no can be.
Oh boy, yes.
It's an understatement of the year right there. Can be tough. Wow.
So I think we first got familiar with Coast through 4 Legs to Stand On. And we had a grant here, I think, or something, but you guys came and performed it in all our communities. So I felt like I could have jumped up. No, I'm not an actor, but like you guys seem just like a family. Like you could see you guys beforehand, and if someone had a little mistake, someone would just jump right in, and it was like a big family. Is that how it always is, or just when you're working on a little project around?
I don't want to speak for everybody, obviously, but I have to give a shout out to Annabeth and all of the staff who run Second Act. because there's a tremendous amount of effort put into the building of emotional and psychological safety, and whatever resources we as a part of the creative community need in order to be our best selves. And when we go into rehearsals, when we are doing workshops together, when we're, doing new plays or anything, there's just a lot of time that is spent to make sure that everybody in the room, do you need something? Do we need to check in about something? And that space is created. And I feel like outside of second act, outside of recovery, the world just moves so fast. And there's such a disregard for people's emotional experiences. And as if health is something to be taken care of only when you're at your therapist's office, like for that 1 hour a week. And in a space like second act, like, for instance, let's say Ryan and I were doing a scene together and something that Ryan was doing made me feel uncomfortable. There's a safety that is in our community where we could actually have that conversation. And Ryan would be open to hearing that. I would be given the space to share that with him. We could then talk through what needs to happen next. And then when we come back together, there's not resentment, there's not anger, because we talked through it. And I don't feel like my needs were disregarded. And he is made aware of something that maybe was causing discomfort, in me. And he actually cares about that. I'm speaking for you now, Ryan.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, you do a better job speaking for me than I do speaking for myself. We are a recovery friendly workplace. So we do want to cultivate a workspace that we're fostering like support and the well-being and the growth of the people in our organization in recovery. So we're focusing on harm reduction and prevention, evidence-based practices. So we start a rehearsal, and it's, we do a little drama therapy exercise. We incorporate a lot of drama therapy in a lot of our work. And, when we close a rehearsal or a show, we do a drama therapy exercise. What are we leaving behind? What are we taking with us? And I think that really helps us all feel connected. And I think theater spaces and actors are, probably naturally a little more drawn to those kind of exercises and activities. But really, I mean, as I mentioned before, it's a small community in many ways, although, obviously substance use disorder and actors, there's so many out there. But it's a very unique situation for some of us to just find that community in the first place, because I think so many of us got into, drugs and alcohol because we were feeling isolated and alone. And one of my favorite things is we also do shows in other states outside of Rhode Island, Massachusetts. So sometimes we'll do trips we got to do a long car ride up to New Hampshire, Vermont, or we've done things in New Jersey and Ohio. We also have a chapter. When you're just on the road for 2 hours driving and chatting, I mean, Brashani's smiling. We've had some, we got real deep into it on those long car rides. And, obviously, you get to know your fellow actors a lot. And there's a lot of us. I mean, it's not just the 4 actors I think you saw when they performed Four Legs to Stand On. They're always swapping them in and out. And what might be your wife one day is, your wife, a different day. The characters I'm thinking of here. Yeah.
It was fun. When I got on your website, I went through all your actors and I could pick out a couple that I remember seeing. But I actually think I saw some of them play different roles, because I've seen it so many times. I was like, oh, what are they doing over there? And then there was a follow-up to Four Legs, right? I believe so.
There's been a number of plays over the years from both organizations. Coast had, Four Legs to Stand On, which was they had like an act 1 and an act 2. And I'm assuming the one you saw was the one, it was about a family of 4 and kind of focused on opioids.
Then there was one with a therapist too, right? Wasn't that the second part to it?
That maybe it was Act Two, another play that Coast did.
Maybe.
And Improbable Players has had a number of plays over the years as well. Of course, there's the oldest one that I mentioned earlier called I'll Never Do That, about a family of four, and how alcohol and drugs are impacting that family, not only the people that are using drugs and alcohol, but the rest of the family. And then there's been plays focused on opioids and high schoolers. Even back in the day, there's plays focused on the AIDS, HIV topics. And we're always working on new plays. We actually have a new play that we just premiered literally just like a month ago, which we're excited to start bringing to schools as well. That's kind of focused on the intersection of like identities and coping mechanisms, specifically for LGBTQ plus and folks of color as well. So yeah, we're always adapting and growing. Meeting the schools where they're at.
That leads me to my next question. What's the process? Can any one of the actors come up with an idea, then we form a script around it? What's the whole process to becoming a play at Second Act?
So
like Ryan,
have you written a play? I did a little writing. I was part of a project with a few other people. We got a grant to write a piece about vaping. So I created with a couple other actors this was for Zoom as well. This was during Zoom only play. It was wild.
That's hot.
Yeah. We had to get real creative to keep their attention.
And we do have we have a director of new plays, like a person who runs our new plays chapter of Second Act.
Wow.
Yeah, we have an awesome playwright. She writes musicals as well, named Elizabeth Addison. And I think she has a play premiering in New York coming up soon here. Yeah, but
singing soon.
We have
once.
Remember that a couple of years ago we did this was right before the merger that we did a musical. They didn't let me do much singing. They shoehorned me into the like little comedy parts, but that was for an event.
I usually do that for the outstanding voices. They usually do that. They don't want to brag, so that's probably why they only had you do that. You don't want to show off.
Yeah, I was dubbed over. Yeah, definitely. No, but our playwriting process is, we take it very seriously. So for this newest play, we interviewed a lot of, people, specifically, LGBTQ plus and folks of color. Our playwright department did, and really try to get those real experiences, real stories. Our other plays are based on actors' real experiences, interviews from those. So there's a lot of research and care that's put into creating a new piece to make it as authentic as possible.
Right. Because if I may add, if you actually want addiction to be totally preventable, then everything that you are sharing needs to be authentic.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that, any sort of scared straight program is ineffective, or any sort of messaging that goes out to young people that just says, abstinence is the only path, is always going to ring hollow, because we are human beings. And part of what we're doing in the recovery world is we are taking the things that human beings have been doing for centuries that nobody wants to talk about, that human beings have been feeling since we've existed, that nobody wants to talk about. And we're bringing those things to the surface. There's a reason that our founder, Lynn, or the founder of Improbable Players, Lynn, who is an amazing, incredible woman, there's a reason that her story around alcohol predates the stories related to opiates. Because I remember being a kid and my aunt and uncle were not alcoholics. They were junkies. And the difference between an alcoholic being able to start to find spaces where they belong in the 80s with Alcoholics Anonymous and other groups of that nature, if you injected, you smoked crack cocaine, you know, if you were on that path, it was like you were very much isolated, ostracized, like you're a different type of person. And so we are excited to be a part of a generation that are bringing all of the authentic experiences of a human being to the surface and saying, we need to talk about this because humans do this. This is something that we struggle with.
Our actors definitely speak honestly, which I think is maybe a rare thing for some students to hear, you know, in a school setting. But I think basic human behavior is that most people don't want to be told what to do. So we're not there to tell them, you know, don't do this, don't do that. We want to, you know, educate and, you know, help, you know, share. And then, you know, yeah, everyone's pathway is different. And just let them know that there are, you know, resources and that they're not alone. And then as Brashani mentioned, you know, the destigmatizing part is huge. You know, we tell them, you know, hey, you may have heard the word alcoholic or drug addict before, but, you know, for the sake of this talk back, we're going to start using the word substance use disorder, because it's, you know, we're treating this as a disorder, you know, a medical, you know, problem, not, you know, something that is, you know, very depersonalizing, you know, when you label someone, you know, an alcoholic or a drug addict. So that's a big part of what we do as well.
Now, after doing this for so many years and doing so many plays around these very difficult topics, do you ever get taken aback, or do you ever get, you know, I don't want to say shocked, but like afterwards, or the talkbacks when that student that you probably didn't think was going to come up to you is coming up to you? Do you still get those moments?
I get moments of deep impact, but not shock.
Okay.
Just like moments of a reminder that even if the audience sat there and you didn't hear a peep, the worst case scenario for a performer, right? Where you hear no laughs at the jokes, no, you know, no gasps at the moments in which, you know, is a poignant moment and you want the audience to be responding or whatnot. But then somebody comes up to you afterwards and they want to ask you a question personally, as opposed to in front of everybody else. And it's just it's always, when they walk away, I always say to myself, yep, the people in the audience were listening and they needed to hear something along the lines of what we're saying.
There's been times we've gone to, I'm recalling this one particular instance we're doing a show in Ohio at this large high school. And apparently after our show, we did a few shows throughout the day there, and the guidance counselor's office was flooded. I think it was just an issue that it impacted a lot of students, but they just, you know, everyone thinks that they're dealing with these problems alone. We have a lot of students, you know, come up, you know, after the show and maybe they just want to ask us something a little more personal. And we always like to end our shows with a question for the audience, which is, you know, can we just get a quick show of hands from everyone? Well, let me preface this first. We actually did a show in Rhode Island that I recall, and one of our final questions during our Q&A was a girl. She just raised her hand. She's like, I don't get it. What is all this? What's this about? Like this, you know, it didn't click with her. It didn't relate to her. These weren't issues in her life. She's like, what's the point of all this exactly? You know, and then we said, okay, we're going to answer your question with another question for you. Can everyone in the audience please raise your hand if you think you might know someone who is impacted by drugs or alcohol? 95% of the hands go up in the room, you know, and this is a middle school. So you see that, you know, definitely like 80 to 95% in middle schools, schoolers are affected by substance use disorder in some way in their life. And in high schools, It's like 100%.
Wow.
These days, what we see with the hands. So that girl that asked that question, she didn't get it. Suddenly she's looking around and realizing that all of her classmates, they never talk about it throughout the day. But now they know, be nice to one another. You never know what people are going through at home. And for a lot of these students, school is the safest place for them. So if we can just kind of make everyone feel like they're not alone in this, I think we've done our job.
Wonderful. And they can also know that it's okay to share with some of their friends, that there are other people that are going through, and if they have a problem that they need to talk about, they probably have now assessed who raised their hand and who might be the person to talk to. I saw that you guys do SEL theaters too. I really had no idea you guys did so much directly with kids, because I've only seen you in community events. So can you tell us about the SEL theater?
Yes, absolutely. So, and we've grown, that department quite a bit in really just the last couple of years. But SEL theater, social emotional learning is a big topic these days. I think the pandemic really kind of sparked the need for that even more so than there already was. But we've been doing workshops in various forms for a long time, and these are workshops within schools that initially we've been in a recovery high school in Massachusetts for many years. A small high school, maybe 10 students in the class, and we'd go there once or twice a week. And these are students that a lot of them were in treatment centers prior to this, and now they're in this high school. And so that was where that kind of started with Improbable Players, at least. And then that's grown, and now we're doing social emotional learning workshops in boys and girls clubs, other after school programs, summer camps. We're also in a long-term, like locked residential facility for teens. And so that's grown and grown. And, that's an awesome, thing. We have a handful of teaching artists, and, they go in, they themselves are actors and persons in long-term recovery. And, they're there to, help them, recognize some of those skills, and they use improvisation, storytelling, drama therapy, exercises, anything kind of we can do in that little performing arts category. We always make sure it's a very kind of trauma-informed classroom environment. And then we, use these exercises to work on those, core competencies of, social awareness, self-management, relationship skills, which, is a proven thing to help with prevention. And then at times, we do get a little more maybe on the nose with it, okay, today we're really nailing in, what are the signs to look for when someone needs help, how to have that conversation, so yeah, we have a number of curriculums we do and a number of different youth serving organizations. Full long answer, but hopefully I covered most of it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Are there different avenues for people to be involved with Second Act? I by this podcast, you can tell I'm a wonderful actor, but some people may not believe that I am. Is there other opportunities for people to be a part of Second Act rather than just the acting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have volunteers that help with anything from with our website to other organizational needs, events. We have, of course, our actors are, we do auditions, every so often, when we have the need, and we do give priority to, those people that are either in long-term recovery or have lived experience. So not everyone is necessarily in recovery themselves, but as oftentimes the people that are affected most by the substance use disorder are the family members or the friends or the loved ones of those individuals. So, we have some people like that as well. And then, we're always, expanding. We have a growing drama therapy department. We have a couple drama therapists that go out to various organizations, oftentimes working with adults as well. And then other ways to get involved, I'd have to double check.
I picture you as like a set guy, Greg.
I could be a sec.
Yeah.
I think I can be.
And allow for the shameless plug of considering becoming a monthly subscriber and donating money to Second Act, even a small amount every month can be helpful.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
So is there anything you guys haven't currently going on that you would like to plug or tell us about?
Currently going on that we'd like to plug? Well, we're in the summer season right now. And so we're getting ready to basically, ideally, we're doing the bulk of our shows in, 1 or 2 months in the fall, kind of a season. And then, we'll do that again in the spring. So if you'd like to, bring one of our prevention plays to your school, we can obviously start scheduling that now. And it doesn't have to be a school, it can be an after school program, a community event. We definitely do shows for adults as well, or a mix of adults and youth. We have ongoing workshops all the time, SEL theater prevention workshops. We have drama therapy that's happening all the time. So I mean, we're always looking for these organizations that need help, and try to help their clients in any way we can, help their youth.
Awesome.
So for those schools listening, or those organizations listening, or just the families listening that may think, oh, this isn't for me, what would be your defense to that response? Why is this needed in schools? Why is this needed in organizations? Why do families need to see this? What would be your response?
There are infinite pathways to recovery. And that exposure and learning about all of the different pathways, even if you see something that we're doing and you decide that that's not for you, that's great information for you to have. You're looking for something else. And what was it about this that just didn't resonate with you? And is there somebody then in the audience, or somebody in our, in our theater company that could make a recommendation of what might be for you? Because I think the idea that there's one pathway to recovery has prevented a lot of people from tapping into the recovery community. And the idea of sober and clean and these sort of rigid definitions of what it means to be in recovery has also prevented people from finding the different pathways to recovery. And so I think my invitation would be to have an open mind, because even if you see it and you absolutely don't resonate with what we're doing at all, I guarantee you there's a path that's like the opposite of what we're doing that might be much more intriguing to you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And chances are, if you don't know someone, that's impacted by this now, chances are you will in the future.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
I wish I had more education and exposure to this when I was younger. I probably would have asked for help a lot sooner. But when you're in the midst of addiction, it's scary. You feel alone. You feel like there's a moral failure, like you yourself, are just wrong and flawed. So I think if I knew more about this, when I was in high school or early college, knew that there were resources, knew that this was a disease, if you want to go that route. I mean, that was very helpful for me to realize, hey, this is partially genetic, for many people. This is environmental, this has to deal with past trauma, so to know that, you know, this isn't a moral failure, and to know that a lot of people are going through very similar things and that there are ways to connect. Obviously, you know, we've all heard of 12-step programs, but that's, you know, that, and those are fantastic, but they don't work for everyone as well. So that to know that there are alternative pathways, as Brashani mentioned, and that there's, you know, these harm reduction is a huge thing now, which, you know, when I was, you know, 10 years ago wasn't a phrase I ever heard as well. So yeah, personally for me, you know, we had DARE, you know, growing up, and obviously that didn't work because I ended up with, my early 20s were a disaster. So I think something like this would have been very valuable.
Yeah.
Excellent. Could you share your website with us? Because it always takes me a couple tries to get there.
Oh, yes. We are secondact.org, and that is second with a 2. If you type in Second Act, there's a Jennifer Lopez movie that pops up. I think is the first search, and we've been working real hard to top Jennifer Lopez. That's a hard thing to do, but yes, we are second with a 2 act.org. Yes.
Thank you. And we hope lots of people visit your site and check you out. And we're certainly going to be spreading your message around our office with all our colleagues that work with schools.
Please do.
For sure.
Yes. Thank you so much for all the great information you've given us.
Thank you.
Holly, Greg, thank you very much for having us on the Totally Preventable podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice
Have
to
a
meet
great
you
day.
I'm Polly, and you've just listened to Totally Preventable.
Totally preventable. Totally preventable. Totally preventable. Totally preventable.